Well, hello there and welcome back to another video. And in today's video we are going to complete this app that we are building, this app where you input the URL of a YouTube video and it gives you back the thumbnail. Right now our app is running at localhost 3000. If I control click it, it should open up in our web browser like this. Okay, so we are using Vite, React and Tailwind CSS. If you haven't watched the first part, go and watch that one first, because we design everything with Tailwind in that video. So before jumping onto the logic, first of all, let's complete one more piece of code, which is the thumbnail that we are going to create a different component for the thumbnail. So let's go into components and I'm going to create a thumbnail.tsx file. Okay, and then basically I use the RAFCE again. Okay, that's a simple snippet from the extension that I showed you in the previous video. So you've got this functional component ready with the import React. So basically this import is needed in Vite, but it's not needed in create React app. So Vite needs it because the bundler is different, it's not webpack, and that's why. So there's no big problem. Okay, so let's in this thumbnail is where we are going to output our image. So let's go in the div and let's style it first of all. Okay, this is the last piece of our styling. So I'll just say class name. Okay, we are using Tailwind, so I'll say flex and items center, margin 10, and flex column. Okay, we don't really need flex column, but let's see. So then we are going to create an image tag which can have an alt, but we don't need it really. And in the source is where we are going to specify the thumbnail URL. And how did we get this thumbnail URL? Well, we are going to use this component in our app right over here. So we are gonna get this from our app as a prop. So let's just get it as a prop. Now comes the real power of TypeScript. Right now the type of this thumbnail URL is any, but we want it as a string, right? So how do you specify the type of this prop, right? What you do is you create an interface and then you name it anything you want. I'll name it props like this, and then you specify whatever you want. So let's say thumbnail URL, and then specify the type of this, and then just do something like this. So we have thumbnail URL that we accept, and then you type it out like this. So what is this? Basically we are creating an interface, and what's in an interface is simply a type for an object. So props is our object right over here. Even if I rename this to props, it will remain the same type. Okay, if I rename this whole object, we are using destructuring, so we are getting the thumbnail URL directly. And so if I now hover over this, you see it's a string. And not only that, whenever we use this component, it's going to show us that you have to pass in a string. So let's take an example. I will say let's just use the thumbnail, so I'll just automatically import it, and right over here it gives us an error that you can't use it because the thumbnail URL is missing in the props. So just pass that in. So I'll say thumbnail URL is just an empty string for now. Okay, we are going to pass in the actual URL later on. So we are going to see how the mechanism works in this application to get the URL. So first of all, let me just go to this channel right over here, my friend's channel, Rhymebill. You just go ahead and subscribe this channel. He's a really great YouTuber. And what I am going to do is first of all mute this tab, and then just go ahead, open up any random video, and what I will do is I will just copy the video URL, or not even the video URL. First of all, even before that, I'll copy the ID. So if I click on share, and you see this is the ID. Okay, we can even get this from out there. So let's just copy the ID, and now if we go back in the thumbnail URL, what you can pass in is the ID. So now we got the ID of the video, and how do we get the thumbnail URL? Okay, we are not using any API, we are just directly using the thumbnail. So how can we get that? Well, there is a trick. So you see this right over here. Even if I comment this out, okay, this is not this is the format of the URL for the thumbnail. Okay, so this is where the thumbnail actually lives, and this is what we want to show to the public. So how do we do that? Well, you just copy this, okay, and paste it here, and then copy the ending part and then paste it right over here. Okay, so you see this is the actual thumbnail URL, and if I was to visit this, okay, if I was to control click this, you will see that the thumbnail will actually appear right over here. For some reason it didn't, and as you can see it did. So the thumbnail URL is just this image.youtube.com/vi, and then the video ID. Vi basically stands for video ID, and then you pass in the video ID, and then you pass in the resolution, which is max res default, and that's how you get it. Okay, so the default is 1280 by 720, which is the perfect resolution we want. Now if I was to save this, and if I was to get back, you see we got the thumbnail. Right now it is completely hard coded, but we are going to, what we have to do is we have to pass in the thumbnail URL. We have to get the YouTube ID from the URL that is entered here. We'll get the ID and then we'll add it right over here. So how do we do that? Well, we are going to create a function for that. Okay, so if we go to the input URL component right over here, we are going to accept some props right over here. So the first thing, even before we accept the props, we want to create some state. So let me just do that. It's a functional component, so we are going to use the use state hook. So I say const something is equal to use state, okay, and then we automatically import it, and this will be an empty string to start with. I'm going to name it video URL and set video URL. Now this is not equivalent to thumbnail URL. This is completely different. Video URL is the whole URL, and thumbnail URL is the URL which is for the thumbnail. So we have that, we have the state now, and so we want to use it in the input URLs because I have the input here, and then whenever it changes I want to update the state. That's why. So if I was to save this, and let's accept the props in input URL now. So as we did before, we say interface, name it whatever you want. I'll name it props, and then I'm going to accept two props right over here, video URL, which will be of type string, and this set video URL also. So if I was to say set video URL, but what's the type of this? Well, if I just hover over this, you see we get the type. So let's just copy this and paste it. So it will be react.dispatch react.setState action string. You don't need to understand this whole thing, but just type it out so that you don't mess up when really passing in the props. So I just say it's going to be props, and then what you get back is video URL, and as you can see we get IntelliSense. That's amazing. And then set video URL. Now when I save it, you see we get an error here because we haven't passed any props. So if I say video URL is going to be video URL and set video URL, if I set it to some string, it's going to give us an error again because you cannot pass in a string. You have to pass in the set state action. Okay, so I can just say set video URL, and that works totally fine. Now let's go inside of input. Now we got these two props, so how do we use them? Well, first of all, you know how forms work in React. So you just say value to the input, you say value is going to be the video URL which we got, and then you say on change. So whenever it changes, you say we get the event back, and then we set video URL to the e.target dot value. Okay, that's how it works. You can even extract this to a different function, but it's just one line of code, so I'm not doing that. Now whenever you update the state, whenever you type in the input, it updates the state, it updates the video URL. Okay, if you want to see a demo, if I let me just show you. I can just say video URL right over here, and then let's go back to the browser, and let's actually omit this component right over here so that we don't see a huge image. So if I was to enter anything, you see the state gets updated. That's amazing. So it works. Now we got the video URL, so whenever a user enters the video URL, it's there. Now when the form is submitted, this form right over here, when it is submitted, so that means when this button is clicked, either when this button is clicked or when someone presses enter, that's when we submit the form. And for that one we create a handle submit, or whatever you know, whatever you name it, the function when the form is submitted. So what we'll do is we'll accept another prop and we'll call it handle submit, and this time it's going to be form event, or you can just say react dot form event handler. What is this? Well, this is the type for the on submit event. So if I just say, go ahead and say on submit, and then I use an arrow function right over here. Now whatever you pass in inside of this one, in this on submit right over here, is of this type react.form event handler. So this is what we want to pass in, and if I hover over this, you see react.form event handler and then HTML form element. This is not important right over here because we are just using a simple form tag, so it's not important. So you can just go ahead and we can just first of all get the prop from here, handle submit, amazing, and then pass it in right over here. So we got this. Now let's get the prop, and to get the prop we need to create it. Okay, so if I want to pass in handle submit, I need to create the function first. So let's just say const handle submit, you can name it whatever you want for now, and then we are going to make it an arrow function. Now basically to make this this form event handler, I will type it out. So I'll just put a colon after the const and I'll say react dot form event handler. This types it out, and now the biggest advantage of this is that we get intelligence, we get the drop down. So if I was to say E, which is the event, so if I was to hover over this, this event also got its type, which is amazing. So if I was to now say E dot prevent default, in normal JavaScript you won't get this intelligence because you don't have typings, but here you get it. So let's just quickly do this. E dot prevent default. Why are we doing this? Well, because when we submit the form, the page refreshes, and we don't want to do this. If I was to just click on get, okay, let me just copy the URL and then paste it, hopefully get. So the page refreshed right over here. If I just do it again, the page again refreshed. We want to omit this behavior, so we say e dot prevent default, which is event dot prevent default, and let's handle this crying input URL now by passing in handle submit. Hit save, and now when you just put anything, the page will not refresh when how many times, doesn't matter how many times you submit. So we got the handle submit. Now let's put the final and last logic in this one. So this is kind of interesting. What we will do is we will create another piece of state. So I'll just copy and paste this. How? I'll say alt shift down to duplicate this whole line, and then I can just say it's going to be thumbnail URL. We got intelligence by VS Code by our suggestions. So I'll say thumbnail, set thumbnail URL. Now this is the state for thumbnail URL. So whenever our form is submitted, we are going to change the state, and the thumbnail URL is what we are going to pass in directly inside of this one. But for now we are going to omit this for now, just for now, and hit save. And now let's get the ID from the URL. How do we get that? So I found a really nice article on geeksforgeeks.org where they show you how do you actually get it. Now this is by the regular expression. So you see this regular expression, this long regular expression, you can use it and it will basically get the ID for you from even if the URL is youtube.com or the shortened one, which is youtube.be or whatever it is, even if it is a playlist URL and anything. This is the regular expression. We are going to use the same thing, and it's not made by me, it's by the guys over at Geeks for Geeks, so kudos to them. Let's just copy this whole regular expression, and then I'm going to store it inside of a variable. So I'll just say const id regex and then just paste that. So this is the regular expression for that. And if I hover over this, you see it automatically gets a type, which is regular expression. And after we have done that, now let's check if this regular expression is false. So basically, if our video URL does not contain the ID, so basically our video URL is wrong, it's not a YouTube URL, it does not contain an ID. So if that's the case, we are going to just get out of this function. So I'll say if not video URL dot match id regex. Now what does this mean? Well, if video URL dot match is a method where you can just pass in a matcher, which will be a string or maybe a regular expression, and it will basically match that if that is true or not, and then it will return you either null or the final result. So if we put a bang right over here, so that means if this is false, we are just going to return. Okay, so this thing is done, and now I can just tackle the other part. So if the video URL contains the ID, how do we get it? So let's just create a variable const video ID. You can name it whatever you want, and then I say video URL dot match and then pass in the ID regex again, and then get the index of 1. How? Okay, let me just first of all comment this out, and I'll just console.log video URL dot match the ID regex. Really nice. Save, and let's go ahead and I'll just open up the console from right over there, and let's go to the console. Let's clear this up. Hopefully you can see it. So let's just enter the URL here. I'll just copy this again, any random URL from YouTube, and then just hit get, and you see we get a bunch of options. We get an array of, or maybe an object. Yeah, we get an object with 0, 1, and then groups, index, input, and then length. We get all this, and this is by the match method that we had. What we are interested in is this index 1. Now the problem is that when we try to access this, TypeScript tells us that hey, this can be null. Okay, it's possibly null. So how do we fix this? Well, you can just put a bang right over here between index 1 and this after match. So between these two, you can put an exclamation point to signify that hey, this will not be null. Okay, it's because we are already checking if it is null or not. Okay, if it is null, then we are just going to return it. So you just need to pass that in, and then everything will work fine again. Now I say index 1, so we get this. Okay, it's an object, but still we can use these indices. So we get the ID now, which is this. Okay, the exact same ID, and that's because of this regular expression. Regular expressions are magical, but they are a bit hard to learn. So now we got this, so let's just store it in its own variable. I'll just copy this and I'll just paste this right over here. Okay, now we got the video ID, and simply now I'll just say set thumbnail URL, which is this thumbnail URL right over here, and then I have to set it to a string. Now I cannot set it directly to video ID because it's a URL. I don't want to set it to an ID, which is the plain ID. So what I do is I get this whole string right over here, and then I'm just going to pass in template strings like this. Okay, and then we want the ID in here. This is where we want the ID, so I'll just omit this part and I'll just use this and then video ID. Hopefully you are familiar with this syntax. Okay, so we are just putting the video ID in between. Now that is done, let's just uncomment this thumbnail and then let's pass in the dynamic thumbnail URL as a prop, and that's it. Okay, that's it. If I go back, okay, let's just fix this. We don't want it to be like this, so let me just cut this out. Okay, this one seems a little bit better. So now if I was to hit get, you will see we'll get a whole new thumbnail. Now we are not getting it because it depends on the internet connection, how fast it is. So if I click on get, or if I submit the form, it should get the YouTube URL. It should get the thumbnail to you, and then you can even save it or copy it, whatever you want to do. And let's just get another. So let's go to Ramble's channel and let's get another video. So let's say this one, how to add YouTube video to your HTML website, and then I'm just going to copy this link randomly and then I'm just going to paste it and hit enter, and then you see we got thumbnail, really nice. And if I was to open this up, and then if I right click and copy video URL and then paste it, hit get, it works. Even if I go to my channel, let's just go to my channel and let's pick this up, and I'll say copy video URL at current time, and we just pass that in, it will still work. So that's hopefully it. Okay, we have built the whole app. Now it's time to deploy it. Now I asked you guys in the previous video where to deploy it, Vercel or Netlify. So I just picked up Cloudflare pages. Okay, not Netlify, not Vercel, Cloudflare pages. So let me just show it to you. So Cloudflare pages is by Cloudflare, which is which has a ton of features, and I really like how they built it. So let's just sign in, let's just log in, and then you basically log into Cloudflare pages, and then we are going to get it from a GitHub repository. Now the first thing we are going to do in that case is we are going to push it to a GitHub repository. How do we do that? Well, in VS Code we'll simply do this. We'll say publish to GitHub. We'll do that, and then I'll just name it whatever I want. So this name is perfect. I'll push it to a public repository so that you can check the code out, and it will do all the stuff on its own. It will push the code, it will do everything you want. So it will upload the files and it will do its job. And now let's create a new page. I mean create a new website. So I'll just go into pages dot you can just go to pages.dev. okay, I'll leave the link in the description, and then create a project. So basically you have to give access to your GitHub repository to Cloudflare pages. So let's just do that. I can select whatever repository I want, so I'll just say it's the get YouTube thumbnail, right? So this is the repository, and then I can save. I can give it individual access, or I can give it multiple access to multiple repositories. Okay, so now as you can see we got the let's create a project, and now you will be getting all your repositories if you give access to all repositories. So if I was to click on get Vite thumbnail and then begin setup, you see master branch, of course, framework preset, you can select any one of these. So let's just select, and we don't have Vite in this list, so what you can do is we can just select the framework preset to be none, and then the build command. So in our app, if you check the package.json, so you get the build command, which is tsc and Vite build. So what you can do is you can just pass that in. So I'll just say npm run build, that's the build command, and then the output directory, so wherever it is stored. So if you see on the Vite documentation, by default the build output will be placed at dist. You may deploy this dist folder to any of your preferred platforms. So what you can do is you can go ahead and say the output directory is going to be dist. Okay, and then the root directory is slash. You can add environment variables if you want. Okay, it doesn't matter for now. So I'll just save and deploy, and it's going to completely deploy. It's going to deploy your website, your Vite app, to Cloudflare pages. It's going to give you the production build for that. So let's just wait for that. So we got our site deployed now. As you can see, we see get Vite thumbnail.pages.dev. If I was to click that, it takes us right over here, and then this is the production build. If I was to, you know, copy any URL, paste it, and then it will get the YouTube thumbnail. So that's how easy it is. It took a bit of time, like 2 minutes to deploy it. Duration of 2 minutes and 23 seconds. It wasn't expected, but it did. And that's how everything works on Cloudflare pages. It also gives us this pages.dev subdomain, which is really nice. I like it more than Netlify and Vercel. So I hope this video helped you. Like it, share it to others, comment down if you have any questions, any suggestions for me. And we're going to reach 1000 subscribers, 1k subscribers. We just have 80 more left, so it will be so nice of you if you shared this. And finally, thanks for watching.